Schopenhauer's assessment of suffering and its role in people's lives is grim. He wrote, "If suffering is not the direct and immediate aim of our life, then our existence is a most stupid and impractical phenomenon. For it is ridiculous to assume that the endless suffering stemming from the essential needs of life, with which the world is full of, is aimless and purely accidental. Although every single misfortune seems to be an exception, misfortune in general is the rule." The German philosopher calls it a big nonsense that most philosophical systems try to present evil as something negative, whereas, in his opinion, it is just something positive, making itself felt. According to Schopenhauer, good is negative, that is, all happiness and all satisfaction as a mere cessation of desire and the end of any torment. Also consistent with this is the fact that we usually find joy far below and suffering far above our expectations. To argue for his paradoxical conclusion, Schopenhauer suggests comparing the sensations of two animals, the devourer and the devoured. We are like lambs that frolic in the meadow, while the butcher chooses one or the other with his eyes, for we do not know what misfortune fate prepares for us, illness, persecution, impoverishment, mutilation, blindness, madness, in the midst of our happy days. Arthur Schopenhauer notes that the tortuousness of our existence is much facilitated by the fact that we are constantly oppressed by time, does not give us a breather and stands behind everyone, as a torturer with a whip. It only leaves in peace those whom it has handed over to boredom. Speaking about the benefit of suffering, Schopenhauer writes, "Work, anxiety, labor and need are in any case the lot of almost all people during the whole life. But if all desires were fulfilled as soon as they appear, what would fill human life then, what would kill time? If the human race was to move to the land of plenty, where rivers of honey and milk run through the oyster water and where everyone at once wishes to meet his betrothed and can easily get hold of her, then people would partly die of boredom or be hung over, partly they would fight each other and slaughter and kill each other and cause themselves much more suffering than nature imposes on them now. Therefore, no other field is good for them, no other existence." Hence, in Schopenhauer the criterion of life is quite different. Life is measured not by joys and pleasures, but by the absence of suffering as a positive element. As varied as the forms in which human happiness and unhappiness manifest themselves and induce them to pursue happiness or to flee from unhappiness, they all have the same material basis, bodily pleasure or suffering. In this respect, the animal is much better off than man. The animal, being incapable of reflection, lacks in it the condenser of joys and sufferings, which therefore cannot pile up in it, as it does in man, by means of memory and anticipation. The animal suffers now, even if it is repeated innumerable times successively, it always remains the suffering of the present. In man, thanks to reflection, out of the same elements of pleasure and suffering, which are common to him as to an animal, he develops such an elevation of the feeling of his happiness and misfortune, which can lead to momentary, sometimes even fatal, delight or even to suicidal despair. Suffering is also heightened by ambition, a sense of honor and shame. These, in varied and often bizarre forms, become the goal of almost all his endeavors, whether they be physical enjoyment or suffering. Of course, Schopenhauer observes, man may have a complex range of activities, from the simplest amusement to the highest manifestations of the spirit. But he is also aware of boredom. So a vast edifice of human happiness and unhappiness grows. So, the measure of suffering in man, according to Schopenhauer, increases much more than the measure of enjoyment, to which, in particular, still very much contributes that he has the real conception of death, while animal only instinctively avoids it, not understanding it. Animals much more than people, Schopenhauer thinks, are satisfied with simple existence, plants, quite, a man, to the extent of his stupidity. That is why an animal life contains less suffering and also less joy than a human life. Man has imagination, inspirational phantasmagoria, the source of our greatest joys and pleasures. Human life turns out to be even more long-suffering because of man's capacity for cognition. Cognition, understanding, is itself painless and not subject to suffering. Pain, suffering affects only the will and is caused by hindrances, obstacles and collisions, and yet it is necessary that these hindrances be accompanied by cognition. That the pain of the soul is conditioned by cognition is evident, and that it increases with the latter, can be easily seen from the above said, as well as from the proofs given in Schopenhauer's major work The World as Will and Representation. So, we can explain the essence of relations in the following way. Will is a string, obstacles and collisions are its vibration, cognition is a resonance board, and pain and suffering is a sound. Therefore, according to Schopenhauer, not only inorganic bodies, but also plants are incapable of feeling pain, no matter how many obstacles their will encounters. On the contrary, every animal, even an infusoria, feels pain, because cognition, however imperfect, constitutes the distinctive character of the animal kingdom, animalism. With the increase of cognition, according to the rock of animalism, pain increases proportionately. In lower animals it is still extremely negligible. From this it occurs, for example, that insects, which can barely keep their hindquarters torn off, can at the same time eat. Justifying the bitterness of life, Schopenhauer writes, "In early adolescence before our future life we sit like children before the theater curtain, in joyful and tense expectation of what is to happen on the stage. And lucky for us, we don't really know what is going to happen. Whoever knows, children may sometimes seem like innocent criminals, who although condemned not to death but to life, do not yet know the content of the sentence awaiting them. Nevertheless, everyone wants old age, which is the state they say, it is bad today, and it will be worse every day until the worst comes." Schopenhauer believes that our life may also be seen as an episode, uselessly disturbing the peace of mind of nothing. Man is still convinced that life is nothing more than a disappointment. It has the character of a gigantic hoax, not to say a trickery and a deception. On the basis of these gloomy reflections, Schopenhauer makes a supposition. Let us imagine that the act of gestation would not be accompanied by either need or lust, but would be a matter of purely prudent reflection. Could the human race still exist then? Would not everyone then have been so compassionate towards the coming generation that they would rather have spared him the burden of existence, or at least would not have accepted the obligation to impose such a burden on themselves in cold blood? The philosopher goes on to write, "Nothing could be truer than the assumption that it is the grave sins of the world which entail the many and great sufferings of the world." I hope you enjoyed this video. You can support it by liking it, subscribing to the channel, or commenting. Thank you for watching.